navigating relationships and cultivating relational intelligence is key in all parts of our lives, personal and professional. But I would also say that at this moment, becoming fluent in the language of relationships is essential to the world that we're going to live in. We are wired for connections, but how can we do it better? May I ask for a moment, how many of you are new to me? A chunk. And how many of you are familiar with me? More. Okay, it's okay. For those of you who are new to me, I'm a psychotherapist for the past 30-something years. I have primarily done couples and family therapy, which means that I am quite familiar with polarized systems, with conflictual relational systems. As you know, couples therapy is a drop-off center. I bring you my partner, I tell you what's wrong with him or her, and I ask you to fix it. So, what's happening in the world at this moment is something that, as a clinician, I sit with every hour, thousands of people in conversation around the globe with whom I grapple with the complexities of modern relationships. I believe that the bonds and the connections that we have with other people provide us with a greater sense of meaning and happiness and well-being than any other human experience, which is to say that it is the quality of your relationships which ultimately will determine the quality of your lives. And there's a big difference, the way that David Brooks was talking about it, between a glorious CV and the eulogy you will get. You understand what I'm saying? Even the Harvard longitudinal studies, that's 8 decades long, that has followed men, at the end of all what these men had accomplished and have accomplished, it was the relationships that they have that was the most important marker for their health, their mental health, their sense of well-being, and their sense of meaning in their lives. This is true for everybody. I don't think we can glorify the relational importance just for women. Now, let me ask you something. How many of you are currently in a relationship? And how many of you would like to be in a relationship? And how many of you would at least on occasion like to be out of the relationship you're in? Honesty is good. And how many of you would say that you have ever had a hard relationship issue, let's say at work? Good, the normal people. And how many of you thought the problem is with the other? Now, I do want to ask, how many of you thought maybe the issue is with me? Okay. And how many of you thought both? Because that's probably the truth of the relationship. Right? The relationship isn't what each person is, but what happens between the two people. And it's that dynamic that I want us to explore together. You know, I think that there's a few important things happening at this moment. Relationship norms are changing rapidly. They're shifting under our feet. And I've done a lot of work talking about them in the personal space. But what is really important is to see what is happening at work and how much of my work on relationships in the last year or two has brought me to work with co-founders, with executive teams, with companies, and at corporate conferences. Why? Because which would never have happened, by the way. The relationship intelligence, until recently, was the scourge of the workplace. And do you hear this? I've been hacked. Somebody's talking to me. And everything about relationship stuff would have been called soft skills. And soft skills would have been considered feminine skills. And feminine skills is something that you idealize in principle but don't want much to do in reality. This idea that the language of emotion is entering the workplace and has literally become the new business buzzwords is very telling about something that is happening at this moment. And there's a lot of restlessness in the world about relationships, about how we handle disagreements, breaches, violations of trusts, and it makes us very anxious. And when we get anxious, we tend to react, because the first thing we want to do is do away with the anxiety rather than sit, think, process, listen, and then figure out what we want to do. So part of what we will do here as well is to slow down a little bit. I think that for me, if I was to look at it, I would say this. There's been two relationship revolutions. One is happening at home, and one is now happening at work. The relationship revolutions have two things in common, and it's this. It wasn't too long ago that our sense of identity was something that was basically given to us. And it still is like that in many other parts of the world. You knew who you were, you knew you had a clear sense of belonging, you had a good sense of rootedness, and you had a sense of continuity. Your rules were clear, so you knew what was expected. Parents knew how to talk to their kids, husbands knew how to talk to their wives, wives knew what not to say to their husbands. It was rules, it was duty, it was obligation, it was clarity, it was certainty, and all the big decisions were made for us, which meant that you were rarely alone, but you also were barely free. And we live now in our world here, in which we have more freedom or supposed freedom than we have ever thought we had. The clarity and the rules and the duty and the obligations have been replaced by choice and by options. And certainty has been replaced by uncertainty and by massive self-doubt. It takes a lot to have to define who we are. That process of self-definition that is part of our identity formation at this moment has created a situation where the burdens of the self have never been heavier. And many of you are spending your time wondering, who am I? What am I? Am I what I want to be? Am I where I want to be? Is this good enough? Can I be more? Can I be better? There's a reason the self-help movement is as powerful as it is, because it feeds an entire frenzy of individual people who are longing for individual pursuits, but ultimately also to connect with other people. This shift has also been met by something else. For a long time, our relationships at home were basically for survival. Then we brought in romantic love and companionship. And now we have gone up the Maslow ladder of needs, and we want intimate relationships for self-actualization. Meaning, I want you to help me become the best version of myself. Something very similar is also happening at work. We don't just leave because the factory closes when we have those options. We leave because we are not being properly promoted, because we are not being recognized, because we are not being seen, because our identity formation is being stunted. We expect our managers to be our coaches and to help us move up the Maslow ladder of needs. If we used to leave our relationships because we were unhappy, and now we leave them because we could be happier, the same thing is happening at work. We don't just leave because we are unhappy or because we are not getting the paycheck that we want, but we leave for the quality of our life and our relationships and our self-development that we expect to meet in those work situations. And for many of us, we will have a 10-year period where we will be often single or in nomadic relationships and primarily look to work to give us what once religion used to provide. What has fundamentally shifted is the loss of the social structures. The church, the religion, the hierarchies, all of that, which gave a lot of grounding. And now we have to create this thing all along. So what has replaced rules? Conversations. For the first time, at the heart of relationship is conversation. It's not clear what you should do. It's not clear how you should talk to each other. It's not clear if a person reacts this way, you should do this or you should do that. You should continue because you were told that if your parents had not continued, then they would never have been there together, and look how happy they are now because somebody insisted. Or, no, you should not insist because you should get a clear sign, and if you don't get a clear sign, then it means you should stop. You recognize that one? Okay. I had the most fascinating conversation here last night till 2 o'clock in the morning, which completely changed the entire talk, by the way. Because it was an enactment of the moment that we live in, but we'll get to that. So what is interesting to me is the parallel shifts. When you look at your romantic lives, when you look at what has happened in the way that we have basically embraced romantic consumerism, and we are looking for our soulmate on an app, and we know that we have found the one when we can delete the app. And that is the new ritual of commitment. It's not a bunch of flowers, Look how special you are, FOMO gone, But if you think for a second, what do we look for? Transcendence, mystery, awe, ecstasy, wholeness, meaning, all kinds of stuff that we used to look for in the sanctuary of the divine. This is a very interesting thing that is happening between religion or spirituality and relationality. They have collapsed into each other. For most of history, the soulmate was God, not another person, with whom you were going to have to experience the multitude of needs, So that's one thing. And the second thing that is happening is that we have brought the market economy into our romantic life. Eva Illouz calls it emotional capitalism. I can tell you, 30 years ago, 20, 15 years ago, I wouldn't hear in my office people describe their relationships. This is not a good deal. This is not what I bargained for. I have to cut my losses. Where is my KPI? What the hell? That is relationship language? A market economy has entered the romantic space. And at the same time, the world of emotion has entered the business world. We talk about psychological safety in the same sentence that we're talking about performance reviews. We're talking about authenticity and belonging and transparency and trust. It's unbelievable. And we rarely define them, by the way. Longevity, career, loyalty, what do they mean today? They're being literally redefined both by working people and by their managers, by the employers and the employees. And that means that for the first time, relational intelligence at work becomes foundational. Now, it's difficult to talk about trust when you live in a nomadic economy where the Wall Street Journal is telling you that the quitters are the winners. And that if you move around a lot, you actually will get more promotion and higher positions. Because we still, on some level, have the idea that trust is something that gets cultivated over time through tests and experiences together with other people. Of course, this has changed because we have a share economy in which we are trusting total strangers with our home and our most precious belongings. So the whole definition of trust is shifting. But it's difficult to have a feeling of belonging when you don't stay long enough, or to have a feeling of belonging when you're hired by the day and by the hour because it suits the numbers of the company. And every book these days about relationships is going to talk about belonging, or the lack thereof, and about loneliness, or the isolation and the lack of connection. This is the two main subjects that everybody is talking about. Partly because when you dismantle a system, like the one that we had, and you introduce a new social system, you can become evangelical about it, you can be very happy about all the changes, but you have to deal with the consequences of the changes. And one of the things that Dan Siegel was talking about so beautifully yesterday is that an individual, a body, a society, a relationship needs to regulate itself. And one of the main things we regulate ourselves on is between stability and change, between chaos and rigidity, between the past and the future. When we have too much change going on all at once, we become ontologically anxious or anguished because we can't catch up, which is partly what is happening now and what has been propelled in the last year by the new president of this country and by the new presidents of a bunch of other countries and by the Me Too movement. It's a unique educational opportunity, but it makes a lot of people very nervous. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, because it's 9 o'clock in the morning and I am deluging you with my nightly ruminations, you know? I was up the whole time thinking about this. You've been sleeping and dealing with the time, you know?